In part 2 of what are the most common forms of attack, we will analyze session hijacking, fixation, and request forgery. We will then have a look at SQL injection. Session hijacking occurs when the PHP session identifier is obtained through various mechanisms by the attacker. The session identifier can then be used to forge user credentials or to launch what is referred to as a cross-site forgery attack, where the valid credentials are then used by the attacker for their own purposes. There's also a variation of session hijacking referred to as session fixation, where a one-time URL is created. This is oftentimes the case when an email confirmation is generated for users just signing up to a website. The problem occurs when the attacker somehow obtains the URL or is able to reverse engineer the algorithm used to generate the URL. Again, looking at the White Hat security report, you'll notice that 26% of the websites surveyed had a cross-site request forgery vulnerability, and 14% of the websites had a session fixation vulnerability. To demonstrate this, we will first log in as a valid user. We will then grab the PHP session identifier, go to another browser, open up a session on the Suites Complete website, and impersonate the same user that we logged in as. So first of all, from the Suites Complete website, we select Login. We then enter the username and the password. We click Submit, and you'll notice that it now says, Welcome, Spencer Sanford. We can then use the technique that was mentioned earlier to grab the credentials. Normally, of course, this would have been done automatically through some mechanism. We then move down to the very bottom of the page, and we can now find the PHP session identifier, which is recorded right here. We will then copy this information and move over to another browser where we are going to tamper with the cookies and impersonate the user that we just logged in as. So notice we're logged in as guest currently. We run a tool called Tamper Data. We start the tamper. We then select any page. We can then reference the cookie and replace it with the cookie that we hijacked. You'll notice that we are now logged in as the user Spencer Sanford. At no point did we perform a valid login. Let's turn our attention now to SQL injection. SQL injection is where user input is somehow added to an SQL statement to produce a modified result. It is much less common than in previous years. You'll notice that White Hat indicates only 7% of the websites surveyed were vulnerable to this attack. However, if executed successfully, it can be extremely devastating. Sensitive information can be revealed. The website itself can become infected. It can also be used to alter, corrupt, or empty the database, which can result in loss of business. As an example, what is oftentimes used is the union select SQL statement. In this example, we are going to insert this fragment into an input field. What would normally happen is that the attacker would probe the website to see what sorts of SQL can be executed. The attacker would then use various techniques to guess the names of fields. In this case, the field names are fairly obvious, which is another security vulnerability which will be discussed in another video. So let's take this fragment and go to the Suites Complete website. Go to Members, and you'll notice that we've got a list of members, including the bogus user that was entered earlier. In the keyword search area, we insert the injected SQL fragment. We click on Search Members, and you'll notice if you move a little bit further down the screen, all of a sudden, we are now seeing passwords, account balances, phone numbers, and other pieces of information, in this case, just the user's name. So cross-site scripting is where information goes from one site to another. It can take the form of reflected or stored. It is a form of code injection where JavaScript is the most serious threat. Other threats can include image tags, other HTML tags, and CSS. White Hat indicates that 53% of the websites surveyed were vulnerable to this. Remote code injection is where PHP code is uploaded and run from the victimized website, or remote code is run directly from their website to your website. Session hijacking is where the PHP session identifier is hijacked. This can then be used to forge credentials and launch cross-site forgery attacks. There's a variation referred to as session fixation, in which case a one-time URL is created. The danger arises when the attacker is able to obtain this URL. Between these various attacks, White Hat estimates 40% of the websites are vulnerable to this. SQL injection is not as common. However, if successfully executed, it can be extremely devastating.